So I'll now come on to our next speaker, Rajshekhar, who's a journalist who's been reporting widely on economic issues for a long time. He used to write for the Economic Times, and more recently for Scroll, he did a series called Ear to the Ground, sort of doing very immersive journalism across India, different states, Mizoram, Manipur, Tamil Nadu, Punjab, Odisha, Gujarat, and Bihar. And happy to have Rajshekhar next. Shekhar, over to you.
Hi. I won't say too much about the book itself. More experienced senior colleagues have already told you about the book. I will only say that I've read a few books on environmental struggles and so on and so forth. And then this is one of the better ones I've read because A, it's extremely granular on one state, and B, it is a people's history of people movements. Okay, that is very rare. In my little soliloquy, I wanted to focus on a different question. It's something that I'm puzzling over right now. I was in Orissa around the same time when Ranjana ma'am was working on her book. I was there for some 5 months or something like that. And there was a particular paradox that could be seen. You know, you go to Niyamgiri and you see that there is indeed a protest. In the past, I've been to Costco. On that particular trip, I went to Kuchaipadar, where Utkal Alumina is mining bauxite, and those places have seen protests. In the same period, however, over the last 5 years, Orissa has seen a bunch of other dispossessing activities. The iron ore boom has benefited a small number of people. The monies from that iron ore boom flowed into a bunch of secondary booms, chit funds, a big explosion in the number of engineering colleges. And each of these actually hurt a lot of people, but you didn't see very large protests around these. In the same way that one did not see protests around extraordinary shortages of school teachers, medical healthcare department staff, things like that. I mean, there was this one case when there were a lot of deaths due to, I think, Japanese encephalitis in Kandamal, and then it transpired that the entire district had no more than either zero or one pediatrician for the entire district. And this is state failure. And you didn't see too much protest around this. And when you look at these state failures closely, I tend to think of them as another form of dispossession, in the sense that resources are being extracted away from the public commons to benefit a few people. And yet, this contradiction that people protest some forms of dispossession much more than they protest others. And Orissa is not isolated in this. I had left the Economic Times in 2015 and joined Scroll for what became a 33-month romp across 6 states of the country, looking essentially at state functioning. And everywhere you see the same paradox of the government generally studying failure, but also people protesting on some fronts but not on others. In Mizoram, people were protesting because their wage salaries were not coming on time, but they were silent about rapidly deteriorating healthcare delivery. If you look at Punjab, people were protesting about a whitefly crisis in cotton, but they were, or the desecration of the Guru Granth Sahib and feeling that the government hadn't done enough to stop it. But they were very, very silent about the general annihilation of the farm extension machinery. Or they were generally pretty remarkably silent about the rise of the Badal business complex in just 9 years. Or again, silent about extraordinary understaffing in the Punjab healthcare department, which had, if I remember correctly, again, a grand total of something like one cardiologist in the entire state public health system. You look at other states and you find that Tamil Nadu, yes, there are protests around Sterlite and Tuticorin, but you don't see much protest around, again, declining standards of education and healthcare delivery. You see protests around, local protests around sand mining, however. Gujarat, same story, protests around GST. Not so much protest by partidars, but not so much of a protest around, let's say, the kind of slashes in import duties for palm oil that result in groundnut not getting MSP rates any longer. And this is the question that I have, even while reading Ranjana Ma'am's book, that why do people protest some forms of dispossession much more than others? I mean, and then the argument cannot simply be made that maybe people don't find health and education important enough to protest for, fight for. Almost all parents I meet when I sort of move around are busy sacrificing their savings to try and give their kids a good education. Or I find families slipping into poverty because of health shock. And so, why is there this lack of protest for several of these activities or state failures? When I think about this in my head, the answer seems to be somewhat akin to what we see with colonialism and neocolonialism. I think people are protesting the forms of dispossession they're able to recognize or the ones which are exceptionally blatant. CAA is a very, very good example of this. In lot of the other forms of dispossession, it is harder to spot them as such. So there is this book I was reading. Okay, I have it here. Can everybody see this? It's called Blues Fell This Morning. It's history of the blues in African American history under Jim Crow. And one of the things the writer says is that, I'm going to read that line out. In rural areas where education levels were low and people knew no better environment, there was little with which to compare their mode of life. People knew they couldn't change the world, but they had to live in it. To me, what I think is happening is that when I go to a village like, say, Uncha Bali in Keonjhar, which from the time its government school came up has never had more than 2 teachers for its 8 classrooms. Even the addition of 1 more teacher is seen as an improvement. There is a particular normalizing which happens. The other thing is that several of these dispossessing activities, I mean, we keep hearing about commons being commandeered by the state, but there are old commons being commandeered like forests, and there are new commons being commandeered like welfare, like funds for welfare delivery. And then a lot of these expropriations and dispossessions, they're not being explained in a manner that people can understand. So what we end up getting, this is of course compounded by language in any case. I mean, when I was writing on GST, I found that language and regional editions, the media, the people in Hosur, the businessmen in Hosur, and you would assume they're better sort of informed, they were agitating and militating against GST, but they did not know that something similar happened in Surat. Those linkages weren't developing. The point that I want to make is that there's a question that I kept going back to in my reporting in Ear to the Ground, that how does a society sort of come to appreciate where it stands? At this time, I'm not really very sure we have a very functional central nervous system as a society. The media doesn't explain a lot of what is going on. Other institutions which could have explained these patterns of expropriation and help people understand what is really at stake and the mechanics of all this. Folklore. Folklore is massively eroding. Trade unions, like what Baron Shaw shows in his book, they had vacated their space in terms of building awareness for people, and that space had been occupied by local political actors. In this sort of a context where people are not being explained about these new forms of expropriation, the logic of a Shah Commission, for example, the logic of what a Shah Commission finds out about how all the leases went to a handful of people in Orissa, for example. In the absence of those explainers, you find that people are able to protest occasionally when they see, like I said, something very blatant or something that they've had experience of in the past and are therefore able to create their own meanings and protest. What you're not getting is a lot of the more emergent processes getting challenged at all, whether it is data or just the new kinds of capital coming into this country. You have a lot of Russian money coming in. We don't know what that does to these processes. I mean, that's roughly what I would have. Thank you.